thanks very much for coming all. I feel a little bit like an imposter because I did things in the first years of the bees hunt and then I completely skived and did hardly anything. But Charlotte over there is the uncrowned queen of the bee hunt, so I'll hand over to her and you'll be in safe hands again. So I'll have to bluff my way through now. 3 years of the Northeast bee hunt, and it has been really, really remarkable. So we started this just before the lockdown, not knowing, of course, what was hanging above our heads. And it was very much a community effort, citizen science. It was not a bunch of scientists doing this, very much made of everyone chipping in there. Growing a community of bee recorders, that was very important. Launched in March 2020, we had 5 spotlight species, and I will end with those 5. 5 species that were interesting, not extremely rare, but also easy to identify, and that was quite important, as we'll see a bit later. The main season, of course, is March to September. You can see bees outside that season, but this was the main time that we looked. So finding so far, over 10,000 records. That's absolutely amazing. 60 species, which is great, and a couple of slides later I say, oh dear, only 60, but well. 408, more than 400 different recorders, and the database has got nearly 20,000 views. So overall, a really resounding success. Lots of participation, lots of data coming in. And there's quite a lot that we can use this data for. Now, interestingly, you see 60 species, what are they? We'll go into a couple of them. I'll look into the spotlight species, and Charlotte will take you through some very interesting species. But we saw discoveries in all areas of the Northeast. In the uplands, the broken-belted bumblebee, Bombus soroensis, which is a northern species, moss-garter bee, northern and western. Then the bilberry bumblebee, also a northern species, bilberry mining bee, and these we really see up direction moors, direction Kielder. But then along the coast, different species as well. The black-headed leafcutter bee, which lines its nest with a kind of wallpaper of leaf that it cuts out from the trees. Blunthorn bee, beautiful picture. You can't see the front of the bee, but it's there. Yeah? And then the red-tailed cuckoo bee, Bombus rupestris. Now it says along the coast, I've been studying the red-tailed bumblebee, we'll see it a bit later, in the Tyne Valley. And this species is a cuckoo bee. It's a nest parasite of eusocial bumblebees. And of course, this parasitizes the red-tailed bumblebee. And in the Tyne Valley, you see a fair number of these guys as well. So, very interesting. And then right on our doorsteps here in Newcastle, roughly 50 species, quite a lot. In the town itself, a whole plethora, a whole range of species. We see some of these, well, you might recognize them already, the tree bumblebee, interesting one, interesting, a relative newcomer to the United Kingdom. You could call it an invader, although, well, that depends a little bit on your definition of invasion. So, let's start back, and we got the same picture up again. This is where we got the bee recordings from, and it's a nice coverage. So we got County Durham, County Northumbria, the 2 sub-counties, and all these grey dots is where the bees are. Or is it? Yeah? You see, it's unequally divided. We've got quite a lot in the urban area, Newcastle, Gateshead, and all down the Tyne Valley, a bit north. The northeast of Durham County is very well represented, up the Stanner. Then we've got Holvesel, Kielder, Rothbury, along the coast quite a lot. But there's areas where you don't see them. So are those bee deserts? Are they not there? Well, slightly different map, and you can see the density of the recordings. And again, it's densest in the urban areas and in the Tyne Valley. So there's a lot going on there. Now, let's zoom in on a little part and see what's actually happening on the ground. So we're going to look at this, red rectangle here. And that's part of the Tyne Valley. And we see different recordings here. Doesn't really matter. Some have a recording of a 4-grid reference, and you got this 1 by 1 kilometer square. others the 6 grid reference, the 100 by 100 meter square, or the round dots there. Doesn't really matter. But these are the recordings on the grounds. And then you got a slightly different feeling of what's happening. Again, the recordings are not evenly distributed. And what you see that quite often, they're nicely in a linear fashion. Over there and along the time, over here. What's happening there? Well, that's probably one recorder on his daily or her daily walk. Walking the dog or going to work or school. That's the monitoring route. So this goes back to where the different bee recorders happen to live and happen to record. There's some hot spots. Well, I can't reach that. But you see, between Clarkhook and Wyden, there's 2 meadows. I know the meadows quite well. There's a public footpath through them. And someone has been monitoring there. Claraville, the nature reserve, very well visited. And where are we? Brother, of course. All this series of rectangle blocks, that's the spectacles, the countryside river park. I recognize one of these spots, that's my back garden. So now, but what's interesting here, oh, I can use the mouse, I believe, eh? Yeah, okay. There's whole areas north of the Tyne where there's nothing. In between Brighton, Clara Vale, Clarkhook, there's nothing. Prudhoe and south of Prudhoe, nothing. You can blame me for that. I didn't go there. So there's lots of areas where we don't have the recordings. That doesn't mean there's no bees there. There's probably quite a lot of bees there, but nobody happens to look there. Okay, that doesn't matter so much. Let's look at something a bit more interesting. Which bees do we see? We got 60 species. That's great. Or is it? There are over 270 bee species in the United Kingdom. So we don't even see a quarter of them. Well, some we got down to this. They only live in the south of Great Britain, and we simply do not see them here. Some are really restricted to the north, and we don't see them here. But surely, there's probably more than this. Now, got to be careful with my words. You get cancelled for nothing. But we live in woke times. Might we be able to explain this in woke terms? Might our bee recorders be suffering from unconscious bee bias? Might I have a preference for some bees over others? Well, look at what we find. The 6 most recorded species are bumblebees. Yeah? Common carnivore, red-tailed, tree, buff, and so on. Yeah? Number 7 is the honeybee. Now that's weird. There's quite a lot of honeybee. The single hive can have 20,000 to 50,000 honeybees. And yet, there are more bumblebees here, and far more bumblebees than honeybees. Of all the recordings here, 70% are eusocial bumblebees. 3% cuckoo bumblebees, and 6% honeybees. And then the rest solitary bees. Yeah? What's going on? Now we don't know, but it's possible that honeybees are under-recorded. People saying, well, oh, there's a honeybee. Yeah, well, I saw one yesterday. That's so common, don't care. The same thing happened with recording of bird species, where people writing down all the birds they saw. For years and years, they didn't write down the house sparrow. House sparrow, but everywhere. That's the most abundant bird. We're not going to write that down. Then the decline started, and it was a huge decline, and found out we didn't have the numbers, because people didn't write them down. So it might be that this is a bit unflattering, there's actually more. Then we go down into, well, the lesser gods. There's one here, where are we? The buckish mining bee, Andrea Michaelinia. In about a month's time, try to visit the spectacles between Wyden and Prudhoe. And if you walk the length of the spectacles, and some of us know that, you walk up to your knees in mining bees. On that one artificial hill, we probably got up to 500,000 mining bees. Yeah, it's amazing. So that is quite, what are you, Russell? That is quite an abundant bee. And yet, we don't really see that back in the recordings. Now, this all goes down to, we need to identify the bees. And I brought the picture, I can show you afterwards. There's some really good books. The Bees of the British Isles, which is wonderful. But especially this one, Stephen Falk. Field Guide to the British Bees, that is a godsend. It's really good. However, it is not a field guide like Rose and O'Reilly for flowers or Killian Mullarney for birds. This is not the kind of field guide you take in the field and you can identify every bee with it. It doesn't work like that. Yeah? Why doesn't it work like that? Well, we got just shy of 280 species in the British Isles. Here's a beautiful one. Ileus, the yellow-faced bees. And it's got these wonderful bright yellow markings on the face. And there's a couple of species and they differ by the form and the space of these markings. Well, that easy. Well, I should have brought one. They're that big. Without my glasses, I can't even see the face, let alone these yellow markings. This is a picture through a dissecting microscope. So it's not that easy to see in the field. If that's a live bee that's moving around, sorry, you're not going to see that. Yeah? That's either Halictus or Rhodesian blossom. This is Halictus, one of the furrow bees. And in Stephen Falk's guide, one of the identification factors is the punctuation, the indentation of the thorax. Goodness me. Well, again, a hand lens is not good enough. You need to kill the bee, take it home, and look at it under a dissecting microscope. So, it is very, very difficult. Well, it's not very difficult. It's impossible in the field to identify all the bees to species. So you're always going to miss out on some. Now, does that make the bee hunt irreverent? Well, not at all. Not at all. 60 species is a really good find. Especially if you do this again, say in about 10 years. Then you can start to see tendencies, what's going on. Do we see some bees coming up? Tree bumblebee, of course. The first tree bumblebee I saw in Newcastle was 2013. I was out with my students, and one of them asked me, "What's that?" And I said, "That's never seen one." and now they're everywhere, of course. Yeah? The coletus bee, the ivy bee, it's moving north. Ashy mining bee might be expanding. So the data set that we got now might prove very, very important, especially if we see that back later in time. Other species, of course, may very well be declining, will be declining. Right, so here you can see the 5 spotlight species. This was the idea that we started with. We basically asked for people to send in observations of these 5. And luckily, they sent in observations of anything else they saw as well, which made the bee hunt far more interesting. The tree bumblebee, the red-tailed bumblebee, so 2 bumblebees, 2 mining bees, the tawny mining bee and the ashing mining bee, and this beautiful one, the red mason bee. So let's have a look at some of these, well, at all 5 of these, and then I'll hand you over to Charlotte. Tree bumblebee, interesting. It's a newcomer. It doesn't belong here. Yeah? First arrived on the south coast in 2001. And people were a little bit anxious. Well, what's this going to be? It's an invader. What's going to happen? Will it upset the balance between our native bumblebees and our native plants? The jury is, well, not really out anymore. The tree bumblebee made an enormous colonization of the British Isles. It's way up, you can see it in the upper picture there, way up in Scotland now. But it happily coexists with other bumblebees. We haven't seen any negative effects on other bumblebees and other plant species. Interesting. I won't point towards it, but someone in the audience is Shannon Goldberg, and she's soon starting a PhD on invasive bumblebees of the Faroe Islands. So what happened here is now happening in the Faroes. Completely different situation because there have never been bees there. So it's very interesting to find out what's going to happen there. Why hasn't it upset the balance? Well, probably because there were still open niches. This one prefers urban areas, parks, woodlands. It's very famous for nesting in bird boxes. If someone says there's wasps in my bird box, quite often it's a tree bumblebee. Under the eaves, it roosts as well. And lovely bumblebee. Then this is my all-time favorite, the red-tailed bumblebee. We saw its parasite already, the red-tailed cuckoo bee. This is quite an abundant one. It's number 2 in the bee hunt. Nice one, because you can tail the female all black with a red tail, easily apart from the male with an extra yellow band on the thorax and yellow on the face. I did some study on these in the Tyne Valley. Lovely. The males appear later in the year. That's completely normal. Now the males should not collect for the nest, and they do not collect for the nest. But you do see them foraging quite a lot on knapweed, which is their favorite plant. In the morning, females go out, forage all day long, and go back. The males come out of bed slightly later, go on breakfast, and then they're gone. They're hunting the females. And in late afternoon, they've had enough, and they massively go and forage on the knapweed again. Completely different picture from the females, but both very important pollinators. We then move to the mining bees, which are absolutely fascinating bees. Mining bees, well, what's the word? They dig their own mines, sometimes 10 inches down to the ground, side mines as well. They collect pollen, stuff the pollen in a cell, lay an egg on it, make next a little wall, and then make another pollen ball and an egg there. Bees prefer flat a nest site compared to some other mining bees as well. Quite often open grass. The tawny mining bee is happily colonizing towns and cities as well. Bees by and large do pretty well in our urban areas. Catherine Baldock has done brilliant work on that. The polylactic posh word for saying they forage on multiple plant species and are quite happy with multiple types of pollen. And they're parasitized by several other insects, and we'll see some examples on one of the next slides. This is one of the most beautiful bees we have, I think, myself, the ashy mining bee, Andrena cineraria. And it seems to be expanding. Can live in a dense aggregation and oft together with other mining bee species. And those of you who know the spatules, mentioned the name a couple of times already, they will know you've got this enormous expanse of the rubbish mining bee. You've got quite a lot of bees as well, and Andrena vulva and some other, about 5 Andrena species there. And here you can see that yellow pollen. This female bee has been collecting pollen, stuffing it up, these bristle hair on the hind back, and now she's on the way back, bring it to the nest. There's a male, slender, elegant, long antennae, and he's waiting outside the nest for the female to appear. Not that many recordings. These blocks here, that's all the spatules. But a beautiful bee. Mining bee ecology, interesting, and we need to know more about this. We know that important pollinators, they apparently are very good for fruit trees, which is interesting. Abundant, well, the spatules mentioned that already. And what they do with the adaptations for carrying pollen, they've got these bristle hairs on the hind leg and they stuff the pollen in between it. Compare that to the bumblebee, with that wonderful, that's papaver, a poppy pollen, and they wet the pollen with saliva and stick it to the pollen basket. That's wet pollen. That's lost for pollination. That will never be rubbed off on the stigma. But that can easily be rubbed off on the stigma. So for pollination, the mining bees might actually be better because they're less efficient in pollen transport. Now, told you about the parasites. Where there's mining bees, they're solitary, but they often nest in large aggregations. And where there's hard workers, there's parasites. And you can see these 3 lurking around, the nomad bees. And they're just waiting at these holes. They see a female leave from the hole. They know, she's got pollen down there, she's got the egg. They sneak in, lay their egg as well. The nomad egg hatches first, kills the larvae, and either eats the larvae and or the pollen. You've got these phacodes, blood bees, the same, and these wonderful Bombididae, bee flies, who just wick their egg whilst hovering in front of the nest, whip their eggs inside. Wonderful, beautiful to see, but parasites, of course. Now, interestingly, and that's an area open for research, I think, there's mention of predators in bird form. Blackbirds come and eat them. That's been reported from Wiltshire and Devon. You regularly see crows on the specials just picking up all these mining bees. Interesting. I don't know to which extent that will have an effect. Right, and then the red mason bee, going over time, eh? Sorry, nearly there. And a wonderful bee, lovely solitary bee, widespread, quite common. It collects mud in low hollows and it builds these mason bee cells. You can see that in the top picture there. Nest in wall cavity in logs. My favorite recording was one that made its nest in a cuckoo clock. I think that's quite special. Often the first to make use of bee hotels, very happy to live in urban areas. And it's one of the few, maybe the only, solitary bee that you can use commercially as a pollinator. That's a German site you can buy cocoons in of Ospia picoris, the red mason bee, and just have them wherever you want your pollinators to be active. Very interesting. Like all bees, they got what's called haplodiploidy. Female is fertilized in flight, the queen. Well, in solitary bees, not the queen. If she lays fertilized eggs, by definition, they become female. Unfertilized egg will become male. It's slightly more complex, but that's the way it works. This one can vary the ratio. It's more expensive to produce females. If the female is in top form, she will lay fertilized egg and make lots of females. If she's quite old and worn out and can't get enough food, she might decide to produce more unfertilized eggs. They're cheaper, easier to make, and produce males. And because she can lay unfertilized egg, it's one of the few examples of a possible virgin birth as well. Very, very interesting insects and easy to spot. Beautiful insects. Right, I'll stop buzzing and I'll hand over to Charlotte.
Yes, I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes or so chatting about some of the other bee species people have recorded as part of the bee hunt and over the bee season as well. So I'm going to kick off with one of the first solitary bees that you can find out and about in the air, and it's one of my favourite bees. It's the hairy-footed flower bee, which has a brilliant name. It's rather bumblebee-like in appearance, very fluffy. The male there on the right has this lovely brown fur, but the name comes from the male's hairy legs, which you can see here. And the male actually uses these hairy legs during mating, and they'll brush pheromones onto the female's antennae, which is very romantic. But despite looking quite bumblebee-like, they have a very distinctive flight that contrasts with sort of the bumbly nature of bumblebees. And they have this dart in flight, and they often hover like hoverflies as well. And they have this really high-pitched buzz that's very unlike sort of the low hum of a bumblebee. They nest in walls, typically soft mortar and old cob walls, and you can often find them nesting close together in large numbers. Females look quite different from the males. They're jet black, but on their back legs, which you can just about see here, they have these orange pollen brush hairs, and that's where the females collect the pollen. It's got quite an unusual distribution in the northeast. It was first known from Annick Gardens, and there's some stories that it may have arrived in stonework where the females were nesting within the stone. But bee hunt recorders have helped reveal new sites for this species in North Northumberland, but also South Northumberland as well. And you can see on the map there that it's quite a big leap from the Annick area. So it's been found in Morpeth and west of Morpeth as well in Middleton. And there's also been recent records from the Barnard Castle area as well, suggesting that this species is spreading northwards from the south. And its cuckoo bee has also been found during the bee hunt, and it's the first record of this bee species in the northeast, so it's really exciting. And it was actually found in Morpeth, which was also a new population for the hairy-footed flower bee as well, so a double whammy. Rinke has mentioned a bit about the cuckoo bee life cycle, and this bee will sneak into the nest of a hairy-footed flower bee and lay its own eggs inside. The resulting larvae will then kill the hairy-footed flower bee larvae and feed on the contents. So a bit gruesome, but part and parcel of the bee life cycle. And this bee is quite distinctive. It's got this ashy appearance with ashy hairs running down the sides of the abdomen and white spots on the legs as well. But currently this is the only known site for this bee in the northeast, and it's worth having a look out for this species if you're near any nest sites of the hairy-footed flower bee, as it may well be there. Another bee that you can find out and about early in the year is a northern speciality. It's called the northern mining bee, and it's one of the bees that are specialist on willow. So it will only collect pollen from willow, and it's one of a few species that are willow specialists in the region. It's not found further south than Yorkshire, and it was known from County Durham and South Northumberland. But bee hunt recorders have recorded this species for the first time in North Northumberland, so really helping to plug some gaps in our knowledge of this species. And it's a type of mining bee, so the females will dig their way into the ground, typically sandy soils, to create their little nest burrows. And it's a lovely little solitary bee. It's got these golden hairs on the back legs, which is the pollen bush, where she collects the pollen. Because it will visit mainly willow, it's quite a difficult species to find when willow is quite high up, but sometimes you're very lucky to find the nest sites. As we come into sort of May-June time, the cuckoo bumblebees will start to emerge from hibernation, and we've got 6 different cuckoo bumblebees in Britain and in the northeast. And they emerge from hibernation a bit later than the true bumblebees. They time their emergence just as bumblebee nests are starting to establish. And cuckoo bumblebees work by taking over the nest of another bumblebee species. They'll linger in the nest and mask themselves in the scent of the nest, and then launch their attack on the queen bumblebee and lay their own eggs inside, and then the worker bumblebees are fooled into looking after the cuckoo bumblebees' eggs, which is really quite amazing. And the red-tailed cuckoo bee here attacks the nests of red-tailed bumblebees, and it's known as quite a scarce species in the region, but records are increasing, and it's also increasing in range as well. Through the bee hunt, over 120 records have been made of this species, and it's a remarkable mimic of its host species. So on the left here is the red-tailed bumblebee, and on the right is the cuckoo bee, and they've got this same colour pattern, so largely jet black with a red tail. And there's a few telltale signs that you're looking at a cuckoo bumblebee. They're often quite dark and smoky in appearance. They look a bit meaner. They often have lost a lot of hair as well, so they have bald patches. But another field sign is the back legs. So on the left-hand side, it's a true bumblebee, so the females will be collecting pollen, and therefore they have these shiny pollen baskets on their back legs where they store the pollen. However, cuckoo bumblebees don't bother with collecting pollen at all, so they lack this pollen basket. They're relying on their host species to collect pollen. And so instead of this shiny pollen basket, they have these dense hairs on their back legs. So that's another field sign to look out for. So there's 2 maps here of the red-tailed cuckoo bee. On the left there is a distribution map from 1990 to 2019, and on the right is bee hunt records of this species from 2020 to 2022. And hopefully you can see that we have helped to plug some gaps of this species distribution in the region, particularly along the coast and in South Northumberland as well. So bee hunt records are helping us build a better picture of species whereabouts in the region. As we get into June, July time, there's a solitary bee called the wool carder bee that's out and about. And it's a very distinctive solitary bee in that it has these yellow dots running down the side of the abdomen. It's quite a robust bee. It's probably the size of a small bumblebee. And males are fierce. They're hugely territorial. They'll defend a patch of flowers for a female, and they'll pounce on any intruder that comes along, including bumblebees, which can be double their size, honeybees and other insects. And they're actually armed with spines at the tip of their abdomen that they use as a weapon against any intruders. Females will actually go to plants not just for nectar and pollen, but they'll also go to plants to collect plant hairs too, which they use as nesting material. And they'll particularly visit lamb's ear, which has these lovely woolly hairs on their leaves, and they'll comb this material to create their little nest burrows. And they typically nest within dead wood. It's got quite a scattered distribution in the region. It's known from Berwick and a few sites along the Tyne and also Darlington. So it's quite widespread, but there's big gaps in between its known sites. So if you do have lamb's ear in your garden, or if you live by a known population, then do look out for this species in sort of June, July time. As we get into July, August time, we have a little harebell specialist bee called the gold-tailed melitta bee, or also the bellflower blunthorn bee. And this is a solitary bee that will only visit bellflowers for pollen, particularly harebells. And it's only known from 3 sites in the region. It was first found in 1997 on the North Northumberland coast. And then there's also a known site along the River Tyne around Wylam. But in 2021, a third site for this species was found through the bee hunt at Vinkenoog Links. So there is a chance that this bee could be elsewhere in the region. If you come across any good harebell sites, do look out for this bee. And you'll find that the females have this lovely purple pollen on their back legs from harebell. And they're called the gold-tailed melitta bee because they've got a lovely gold tip to their tail. And you'll often find the males sleeping inside the flowers of harebell as well, or when it's bad weather. We also have a very special bumblebee in the region, known as the broken-belted bumblebee, and it's one of the lesser-known bumblebee species in the region, in part due to its declines, but also because it's a really tricky bee to identify in the field. In the northeast, we have important populations found in the uplands, so the North Pennines, and it's associated with later flowering grassland and moorland, and that's because it's quite a late emerging species. Queens won't be out and about until June, and the males come out in September time, and they particularly like devil's bit scabious. So this is a photo of a male here, and the males are a little bit easier to identify because some of the males have these lovely peachy tails, or a peachy tail fringe, which is a nice little field feature to look out for. But we're very lucky to have this bumblebee in the northeast, and there's a few sites where you can go and find it in the North Pennines, including Allen Heads, Williamston Nature Reserve, managed by Northumberland Wildlife Trust, Bowley's Quarry and Lawforce. But it's a really special bee to have in the region. And last but not least, the last sort of bee to emerge from hibernation is the ivy bee. And the ivy bee times its emergence with the flowering of ivy, and ivy is its main pollen source. and it's a newcomer to both the region and the UK. It was first recorded down south in 2001, and it's since spread rapidly across the UK. It was first recorded in Saltburn by the Sea in 2016, and then in Whitburn in 2019. And bee hunt recorders in 2021 revealed 5 new sites for this species along the Northumbrian coast, with quite a big jump to Bamborough, and it was also found inland for the first time in Stanhope. And in 2022, it was also found along the River Tyne in Wylam. So bee hunt records are really helping to map this species spread across the region. And it can be identified by these creamy bands on the abdomen with a ginger top. And it's one of a group of solitary bees called plaster bees, where they secrete cellophane-like material to waterproof their nests, which is quite amazing. And it's the last bee to emerge. So if you have, I don't want to wish away spring or summer yet, but once the ivy is out, sort of late summer, autumn time, on a sunny day, do look out for this species, because you never know, it might turn up. So the bee hunt is returning this year for its 4th year, which is really exciting, and it launches this Friday, the 10th of March. And now is a really good time to take part, because it's just about queen bumblebee season. And there's 7 or 8 bumblebee species that you can find close to home in gardens and parks. And queen bumblebees are just starting to emerge now. So there's been a few sightings in the northeast already, and they've spent around 7 or 9 months underground waiting for milder weather to come and to set up their nests. And 2 of the bumblebees you are very likely to see first is the buff-tailed bumblebee on the left and the tree bumblebee on the right. The buff-tailed bumblebee is really large. The queens can be massive, and they have this orangey tail and 2 yellow bands. This tail can range from sort of an off-white colour to a completely tawny colour, but they're very likely the first bumblebee you'll find in the year. Tree bumblebees are very distinctive compared to our other bumblebee species. They have this white tail, this ginger top, and a black abdomen, so they're essentially tricoloured. And they're also becoming a really early emerging species. In recent years, I'm seeing the tree bumblebee out before the buff-tailed bumblebee. So these are both early flying species to look out for. And also look out for spring mining bees too. As we get into sort of late March and April time, the spring mining bees will be emerging as well. And coming across nest sites of mining bees is fantastic. And on the top right image here, you can see that these are little earth volcanoes essentially that the mining bees have dug up, and the holes in the middle there are her nest entrances. And they actually close these holes during periods of bad weather. So if there's any rain, for example, they've sealed the nest so no water goes inside. But mining bees often nest quite close together. Even though they're solitary, they do have nests close together in quite large numbers. So it's a really great sight to see. Rinke mentioned the spetchals. Sort of April, May time, do go to the spetchals as it's an amazing sight to see. One of the first mining bees you'll find is the tawny mining bee. Lovely foxy red fur. Very commonly nested in flower beds and short lawns and bare ground, gardens and parks. Has this lovely foxy fur and black haired legs and the black face. A really nice bee to look out for sort of April time. Another early mining bee species is the chocolate mining bee. Unfortunately, they don't mine chocolate, but they do mine into walls. They seem to be like stonework. So So you'll find them nesting in walls or between pavement slabs or patio slabs. And they're quite honeybee-like in appearance, but if you look at their back legs, the females have this black and white haired pollen brush, which is a good feature to look out for. And they often share the same communal entrance to their nests. So this is, on the bottom left here, is a photo of a little group of chocolate mining bees nesting in a drainage hole inside a wall. But they were using this entrance to then lead to their own individual nests. And when looking at mining bees, you may come across a bumblebee mimic, which is the bee fly. Incredible mimics of bumblebees, super furry, and they've got this ridiculous mouth part here that they use to extract nectar from deep flowers. And as Rinke mentioned, you'll find them near mining bee nest sites because they are a parasite of mining bees. The females will flick their eggs towards the nests of mining bees, the larvae will hatch, and then they'll sneak into a mining bee nest site, and then unfortunately feed on the contents. But they're incredible to watch, and the females will actually first coat their eggs in dust or earth to prevent their eggs from drying out. And they're also out and about sort of late March, April time. And if you do find them, it's a sign that you've got a good population of mining bees. And there's a citizen science project called Bee Fly Watch, which is organised by the Districts Forum, and they'd be very happy to also see your sightings of bee flies as well. So we'd love it if you'd like to take part, perhaps for the first time or perhaps returning. And it's really simple to take part in the bee hunt. Firstly, find a bee and then note down sort of when you found it and where you found it, with as many photos as possible. We encourage records through iRecord, which is a recording website where your records can be checked and made available to those who need them to inform monitoring and conservation efforts. And we also accept records on our website as well, which is good if you'd like to get some help with identifying what you found. And we'd also love to see your photos as well, whether that be by email or by social media. And we'll also have a number of events as well focused on bees. And the first is a Getting Started Zoom on the 25th of March, where you can learn a bit more about how to take part and what bees you can look out for early in the year. We'll also have more walks to come as well. There's a couple already in June, and there's also a second Getting Started online session in June as well. And these can be booked via the NHSN website. The Bee Hunt webpage on the NHSN website has lots of different resources and articles that have been put together by local naturalists, where you can find out a bit more about the different bee species we have in the region, and a good way to brush up before the bee season really kicks in. And just to end by saying a huge thank you to everyone who shared photos of bees, shared their records, and really helped make the bee hunt possible and return for a fourth year. It's been amazing to see so many sightings come in from across the region and to really learn more about what bees are in the northeast and how they're doing. So a huge thank you, and we're looking forward to seeing what you find this year.